Hello everyone and welcome to another BrightGen Salesforce release webinar. Hopefully everyone can hear me. If anyone is unable to hear me, then hopefully they'll post in the chat. So I'm your host, Keir Bowden, flying solo once again. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the latest in our never-ending series of world famous Salesforce release webinar. This time on the Summer 23 release, which goes live at the end of this week for some production orgs and the end of the week after for some others. So this is what we'll be covering today. As usual, please post any questions to the chat and I'll pick those up at the end of the presentation. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started with fond farewells as we say goodbye to some old friends that are shuffling off this mortal coil. So first thing, the feedback form from the Salesforce help menu is going to disappear with this release. One of the things you often find with these kind of systems is that when you put a feedback form in, you get an enormous amount of feedback and there's not necessarily an awful lot you can do about it, and it just becomes noise and a distraction. So I'm guessing it's hit that kind of level that they've got enough of what they wanted from that, and now it's time for it to move on. Meeting Studio, I don't know if any of our customers were using this, but this was a COVID response feature really to allow tie video conferencing directly into Salesforce, layering on top of something like a Zoom. But it appears that it's no longer needed, so that'll be retiring on August the 1st, and the advice is to switch to one of your video conferencing favorites like Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, or one of the many others that are out there. Some of the additional account information that was automatically provided when you added account to the system will be retiring in winter 24, so that's around October this year, and this includes news, the automatic population of account fields, and the logos. So something which we're not actually saying farewell to as quickly as we thought we were going to is the retirement of API versions 21 to 30. So these were originally scheduled for this release, but they have been pushed back to summer 25, which will be June 2025. So suggests to me there's clearly a lot of customers still using these, so some additional breathing space is required. My advice would be not to wait though, get yourself on the latest versions or at least on a supported version as soon as possible. And Einstein Accounts and Opportunity Insights is retiring on August the 16th, 2023. Salesforce are switching their focus to pipeline inspection and Einstein relationship insights. So there'll be kind of feature parity across that, I would imagine. Second page of goodbyes, which is unusual, so obviously a big release for it. Salesforce Outlook goes in June 2024, so you've got a little bit of time here. And the advice is to switch to one of the modern alternatives, which is Einstein Activity Capture or the Outlook integration. Asynchronous SOCL is also retiring this release. If you weren't using big objects, then you wouldn't have had cause to use this. But basically what they're saying now is use the bulk API or batch Apex if you need to query big objects data. And you can find more information at the short links shown. As usual, don't worry about trying to capture those links. We'll be sharing the deck afterwards through the usual mechanisms. And mobile application versions pre-230 will be retired in this release. And this applies to both Android and the iOS applications. Okay. Moving on to general updates. Here's the usual browser support information. I won't go through it cell by cell, but as you can see, latest Edge, Chromium, Chrome, Firefox will see you right in most cases. Yeah, but if you need further details, it's there and in the release notes. Multi-factor authentication, again, it wouldn't be a webinar, Salesforce webinar at the moment without talking about multi-factor authentication. It's being automatically enabled starting with this release. Many orgs are already complete, including ours, because someone contacted me about that the other week. Those that haven't been hit yet, apparently you will be complete by the time of the spring 24 release, which is due in February 2024, so about 8 months away. And your reminder that multi-factor authentication is contractually required for single sign-on, but is not checked. To be honest, I'm not sure how easily they'd be able to check that anyway. The performance of some areas of the Lightning experience are going to improve with this release. which I think is about time, right? This is for Lightning Web Component enabled objects, which apparently covers over 1,000 objects, though I haven't seen a list that names them yet. Some aspects of the user interface for these objects will now render using Lightning Web Components rather than the more legacy Aura components. This applies to record home pages, and apparently the combination of these objects means that it applies to 80% of record home pages. So most record home pages should be using LWC and should be faster. And also the related list view all. So that's where you've got the related list in the record home page. You click on the view all and it takes you to another page. That is going to render quicker apparently if you use that a lot. According to Salesforce, this improves performance by up to 40%. And you can again read more at the short link shown. So our next topic is analytics. There is a new unified analytics homepage. This is a personalized environment where you can find all your CRM analytics, reports, and dashboards content. So basically the existing standard Salesforce reports and dashboards, the additional licensed CRM analytics, you can go to one place to find all that information rather than having to know which tabs to jump around to in order to get to those. You can now post Lightning dashboards to Slack. You simply click on the Slack button, hosted in this little screen grab in red. Then you decide where you want it to go, and if you want a message associated with it, then you click the post button, it's the blue one there, and that then gets posted with your message to your selected channel. Lightning dashboards are now called widgets, and these now support text and images. So basically, this means that you can include information in your dashboard that didn't come from Salesforce records, but that you think will help users get the most out of the information that did come from Salesforce records. Note that this is currently only available for unlimited edition. I'm hoping that's just a phased rollout thing and the other editions will receive this in a future release. But I guess time will tell. And if we don't, then I'll probably have some words to say about that at the next release webinar. Moving on to customization. Field level security and permission sets is generally available. So you have to opt into this in setup. Once you've done this, when you create a custom field, you'll be offered the permission sets you want to enable for it rather than the profiles. And if you can see, there's a little information, little eye icon next to the permission set name down the bottom left of that screen grab. If you hover over that, what it will do is it will show you the permission, if the permission set currently has access to the object you're adding the field to. Because if that permission set has no access to it, probably not a huge amount of value in giving access to that specific field. So make it a bit more efficient. This is a kind of a small change, but I think it's a very important one in terms of user experience. You can now specify the field alignment for dynamic forms. So if you look at the screen grab here, the website on the right-hand side, sort of fourth field down, the website and ownership fields, they've been pulled up into the space occupied by the billing address on the left-hand side, which I don't think looks great. It's just a bit annoying. And then you've got this white space down the bottom on the right-hand side as well. So if you edit the field section in the page and check the align fields horizontally box, then the website information, etc., moves down to align with the field on the left under the billing address. And in my opinion, looks a lot cleaner and far less annoying. A couple of app builder changes. I'm particularly pleased about this first one, as I've been pushing for this for a while. App pages, so not record home pages, they already support this, but app pages now support accordion and tab components rather than just the record pages as used to. They're an excellent, I really like tabs and accordions because they're an excellent way of dividing, segmenting, and organizing large amounts of information on a page. But if you do that through a custom component, you use the ability to drag and drop that information. It all becomes very kind of resistant to change. It needs someone to go and edit a component in order to add new fields in, etc. So if you're using the standard tabs component, the standard accordion component, you can drop those on the page and you can drop other components into those. So yeah, I'm really, really pleased to see that. I've been looking forward to this for a while. And a couple of labels in the app builder have changed. The completion button in the page creation wizard has changed from finished to done. And the page properties, the developer name has changed to API name, which is much clearer, I think. Some other customization enhancements and changes. New unrestricted pick lists can now have a maximum of 4,000 inactive values. Existing unrestricted pick list fields are not affected. And if you've got a good reason to want more, you can contact Salesforce support to get this changed. If you do that, I'd also be really interested to hear why you need more than 4,000 inactive values. So please spread the word on that. You can now edit the salutation pick list values in Lightning Experience. Previously, you had to switch back to the classic UI. So another piece of feature parity, must be getting close to 100% now. And new orgs have the MX salutation pick list value for a bit more inclusivity. So this is by default in new orgs, and if you want it on your existing org, now that you can edit the pick list values in Lightning, you can manually add that in quite easily. And some more other. You can now clone a Lightning application. So once you've done that, you can go through the whole wizard and configure additional details, change things around as you clone in a similar way to how you would create a new one. So utility bar, navigation, or you can do quick save, which is just, I want to clone it and I want to use it as is. I just want another copy of it with maybe a minor tweak. This is available for custom Lightning applications only. You can't clone the standard apps. And an interesting one here on the case safe ID. So I didn't actually realize the case safe ID did this in Lightning Experience, but only in Lightning Experience and not if run in Classic. If you passed it an invalid 15-character ID, it converted that to an invalid 18-character ID and returned it to you. Whereas now it does the same as Classic, it just returns you the value as the invalid 15-character ID. Not sure either of those will, are particularly useful to you, but at least they're consistent. So yeah, another piece of feature parity, but how they ended up not having parity is quite a surprise to me. Moving on to my favorite topic, development. Lightning Web Security is now generally available for Aura components as well as Lightning Web components. So this applies to Lightning Experience, Experience Cloud sites, and you need to enable this via setup. So you need to go into setup sessions, Lightning Web Security. And there will be no auto enabling in existing orgs because that would be, in my opinion, suicidally reckless. You want to test this in a sandbox before enabling it, because what this is going to do is this going to suddenly put a new security model into all of your Aura components at once. So you've got to test every aspect, every facet of that. And I know that with our Bright Media accelerator, we've got orgs where there's several hundred Aura components, so testing all those is not an insignificant job. And the last thing you want is that just being auto-enabled and dealing with any fallout that comes with that. So always test in your sandbox if you're thinking about enabling that. Light DOM is generally available, or those of us that predate web components call it DOM. So basically, when you're using Light DOM with Lightning Web Components, the component just attaches directly to the host element rather than being encapsulated in Shadow DOM, which makes it accessible to other elements. So you lose a little bit of security there, but it does accept the global styling directives, which means that you're not having to reintroduce the styling directives in each component. So that can speed things up a bit. Light DOM can contain Shadow DOM, and Shadow DOM can contain Light DOM. They're quite happy switching those around, but this isn't available for standard Salesforce components in the Lightning namespace. So the way you enable Light DOM is you can either do it through JavaScript by defining a static render mode property and giving it the value light, or in the HTML template, you can use the LWC render mode directive and again give it the value light, and that will render with a Light DOM. The refresh view API is generally available. This is very cool. This is a mechanism to refresh the component data in both Lightning Web and Aura components without reloading the page and without having to fire the events we've had to fire in the past for Aura, something we just couldn't do in Lightning Web components. So the idea is that you refresh a specific view, which is a container or hierarchy of components. And this can be in standard Salesforce platform containers, or it can be a view that sits inside your custom LWC and Aura components. And it can either be triggered by the end user taking some action, so letting you know that you need to refresh the view, or by a component when it knows that that something has happened on the server. Maybe it's done an imperative Apex call or something like that. So it knows that everything needs to refresh its view because it changed on the back end. And also on Lightning Components, you can now extend style sheets that have been loaded into a superclass into a subclass component. So you can use the super.stylesheets property to get access to that if that's something you need to do. Lightning Components, Lightning Web Components now support scoped slots in LightDOM. These are a little bit tricky to explain. They're slightly a solution looking for a problem in a lot of cases, but the basic concept is that a child component can generate the data and pass that up to a parent component to style and render. So this is useful if you need to separate the data generation from the presentation because you want the data generation to be used in a number of different scenarios and a number of different layouts. This is LightDOM only, and if you want more information, including seeing a built-out example, take a look at my blog post in the short link shown. Again, you'll see my confusion about exactly why this is a useful thing, but I think there is some use to it. You can now validate your offline Lightning Web Components to ensure they will actually work offline, and I'll talk a little bit more about offline Lightning Web Components later in the mobile section. And there's also a test harness where, having validated that they work, you can then do some testing and debugging to be even more certain that they will work. Moving on to Apex, you can now access labels dynamically, generating their API name via an expression. Previously, this was a literal that was statically bound at compile time. So this is an improvement if you want to have a bit more abstraction. Another small but very powerful change, the set type now implements the iterable interface. So you can iterate the elements directly rather than turning them into something else like an array that you can iterate. But it also means everywhere that's expecting an iterable parameter, so string.join, for example, that can now take a set rather than you having to convert it. So I would imagine that's a Dan Ballinger change. So thanks, Dan, if that was you. User mode DML operations now throw the correct DML exception in the event of errors rather than the security exception, which they confusingly threw in the past. This is versioned, so it won't break existing code if you're relying on that behavior, even though it is a bit weird. But once you up the API to version 58 or later, come future releases, you will see that new behavior. And there's a new publish callback for platform events that allow you to take action based on the final publication result. So the way platform events work, because they're asynchronous, you would queue it to publish, and then it would come back and say, yeah, that was queued. And you really didn't have any idea after that if anything went wrong. As long as it queued okay, you consider that a success. This now allows you to have a callback that says this was the final result when it was actually published. So you can take action if there was an error, for example, at that point in time. Packaging, normally more of an ISV thing. We don't talk about it that much, but I think there's a couple of packaging things that are useful here. The first thing is the ability to transfer second generation packages to a different dev hub, which might sound like an odd thing to do, especially as you need to log a case with Salesforce support and have them perform the transfer. But what that means is you can have a partner build you a package that you use within your org, and then they can transfer it to you, so you take ownership and you own the code. Whereas the way it worked with first generation packages, you'd have to hope that that partner was willing to give up the developer edition that they had assigned that package to. And prior to this, you couldn't take it because it would be associated with the partner's production edition. So this is a good way of allowing package development to become more of a kind of system integration type of operation. And second generation packages, as we know, are very powerful. And also, if you're using a lot of packages and regularly upgrading them, this can be third-party packages on the App Exchange, the performance of this has been improved. So unchanged elements are not deployed, and the Apex test execution is optimized, presumably so that only changed elements trigger tests. Flow Builder next. HTTP GET callouts are generally available. So this allows your flows to access external data without needing to call out into Apex, and does bring us one step closer to parity with the legacy workflow outbound messaging. And unlike many other callouts, this one is configured through clicks rather than having to write JSON. The send email action has a couple of improvements. It can now log the mail to the records activity timeline, and it also supports classic and Lightning email templates. However, if you're going to use templates, bear in mind this does impact limits because it changes the API used. So when you're using templates, you hit the general email limit rather than the daily workflow email limit, which you might find you burn through quicker. And the get records action can now access objects mapped in Data Cloud, what was called Genie up until a few months ago. But for read purposes only, you can't create or change any of that data in there. The data table component now supports searching and filtering results, and that's displayed when you click the show search bar box when configuring your data table. Field visibility errors previously caused the flow to, now cause the flow to stop, whereas they previously were just ignored. So that's a vast improvement that errors actually are surfaced rather than just being swallowed. And there's a bit more space in the Flow Builder canvas now as the layout is more compact and the Add Element button takes up a bit less real estate. Flow and Process Builder. So new process creation is now blocked in summer 23. So you cannot create new processes through Process Builder. You can still activate, deactivate, and edit your existing processes, so they're not going to break, but everything new has to be done in Flow. The Migrate to Flow tool now supports processes with scheduled actions. I mean, given that you can't create new processes and presumably at some point in time they're going to stop you editing those, hopefully there's not too many gaps now in the Migrate to Flow tool and we can all switch over to using flows in perpetuity. If you're using second generation packaging, you can now delete flows that were previously packaged, so you're not stuck with them forever. And the flow permissions are now kind of all gathered together and consolidated in the app permissions section of the profile and permission set rather than being striped across system permissions as before. So it's one of those things, as permissions get added over the years, they just get dropped in wherever makes sense. And sometimes it's nice to pull them all back and have them in a single location. Flow orchestration next. When a paused orchestration resumes, the record variables you access will be refreshed with the latest values. This is another one that is API version, so it's API 58 onwards, so that your existing orchestrations that rely on different behavior aren't affected. But as soon as you update to API 58, you will see this behavior, and it also doesn't include record prior, because that makes no sense. That's the record's prior state before the orchestration launched. You can choose the context for auto-launched orchestrations, guys, hard to say. That applies when they launch and when they resume. Again, this requires API 58, and there's just a reminder that record-triggered orchestrations will always launch in the system context. You can also create custom entries in the orchestrator log by creating an output text variable named comments and assigning it a value. So hopefully this gets output every time you assign it a different value. Otherwise, it's going to be of limited use, giving you one custom log entry. But given they talk about custom log entries, I suspect you'll be able to put multiples in there. And that's going to be really helpful. I mean, the Flow debug logs are pretty good anyway, but that is going to be really helpful just to output some additional information as you need to. And finally, you'll see work items assigned from an orchestration in your to-do list. A major new feature for this release is Scale Center, which is generally available. So this gives you near real-time access to performance metrics so that you can monitor and troubleshoot your automation. You'll need to contact your account executive to get access, which is unusual, but it looks like that's more because of additional terms rather than because of cost, but I guess we'll find out. And once you have access, you can enable it via Setup Scale Center. And if you'd like more information, there's a video covering some of this available at the short link shown. Just a reminder, when you start doing performance testing, you do get an awful lot of information, so you might find that a bit overwhelming. It's not for the faint-hearted, and make sure you allow your people adequate time to make sense of it all, figure out what they should be focusing on and tracking, and actually digging into the underlying problems. Moving on to experiences. A few changes on sites. You can search for CRM records in your Lightning Web runtime sites using out-of-the-box components, nothing to build, and you can also filter and sort the results. If you're looking at redirecting users who don't have JavaScript enabled, I'm sure there's still a few of them out there, although their experience will be relatively poor in most areas. But you can redirect using markup in the head section. So anchor tags are supported to allow users to manually follow the redirect themselves, or you can use the good old meta refresh tags, which will refresh after a period of time, which could be 0. That really does take me back. Einstein lead and opportunity scoring is now available in partner experiences. And you can customize the search component in hero banners, but that applies to Aura sites only. Lightning Web runtime. So this is Lightning Web components only. Remember the Lightning Web runtime? It's a faster runtime, more very much enhanced runtime, purely for Lightning Web components. So with these, you can define visibility rules to show or hide components based on the results of expressions, a bit like you can in the Lightning App Builder. There's a new tabs component, which allows you to do 5 horizontal or 5 vertical tabs. So interesting. Horizontal tabs were in a lot of favor about 6-7 years ago, and then everyone lost interest in them, but maybe they're making a comeback. The list component can now use a list of records as a source. That's quite useful. You can now add a logo to your site. That replaces the community logo component. And you can also use the knowledge article component to allow visitors to view articles, previously only possible in Aura sites. And finally, you can display toast notifications that match your branding. Aura sites now use the Lightning Experience loading and caching mechanism, the very aggressive loading and caching mechanism, which does speed things up a bit, but means that changes don't always appear as quickly as you might hope. But you will see performance improvements, definitely. Salesforce will now email you when you've consumed 95% of your portal roles, nicely before you've run out of them, but so hopefully giving you time to do something about that. And the setup audit trail for admins, that now tracks more site configuration changes, such as activating or deactivating a site, changing the welcome email preferences, and adjusting group membership. So if things change, you don't know why, have a look in the setup audit trail. A call to action for a change. This is a nice change of pace. Experiences are being switched over to the Salesforce Edge network. This improves download times by sending the request to the nearest Edge network endpoint, very familiar to those who've used content delivery networks in the past. All orgs will be automatically enrolled between now and the Winter 24 release in October, and you'll receive an email 60 to 90 days in advance of this telling you it's coming. You can find out more information at the short link shown. Key point to note is that none of the URLs change for your users, so they shouldn't see any impact. Mobile app next. So back to, I mentioned offline again, earlier rather, so we're back to that. So Mobile App Plus is now generally available for a price. This is an additional license and it is an additional cost. However, what it gives us, we finally have offline access and offline store for custom development in the Salesforce mobile app. So this is coming in a couple of weeks after the second release weekend. And it's built on top of Lightning Web Components offline runtime. This looks very smart because it basically analyzes your components and the records you've requested to be stored in your app. It analyzes those two things together and figures out all the related information that will be requested via wire calls, wire requests in your Lightning Web Components, and pulls all those down too. So it basically has a good go at figuring out what else could you do with these Lightning Web Components and the records that you've got in your offline store, get everything else we need. But it needs to be a wired call. If it's not wire, then I don't think you're going to get that information. Something to note, so this isn't like a JSON NoSQL store or anything like that. This offline access is record based. So you'll update records, you'll create records, etc. That'll update in the offline storage. So I'd imagine you don't really see any difference in your code. You just access the records, and these will sync back when you are online to Salesforce. So this isn't the same degree as flexibility as a custom native or hybrid app where you can store whatever you want, sync it to the API of your choice. But I'm sure we'll be able to do awesome things with this, probably involving having large text area fields that have JSON strings in them and the like to trigger automation on the back end would be my guess. Mobile Plus also includes mobile application management, where you can configure security policies in Salesforce. And if your user doesn't satisfy them, they'll see the errors and warnings as shown on the right. And you can also use this to monitor your users' access for compliance purposes. And you can also brand the Mobile Plus app with your company name, icons, colors. So you can turn it into a bit more of your corporate application. Other mobile changes. In one of our earlier webinars, I think it might have been the last one, maybe the one before, we announced that Salesforce are retiring the mobile app community license. So this was something that allowed people to log into the mobile application, using a community license, so they didn't have to remember to put in their user and password each time. So this is planned to be retired in summer 23, and everyone would have to use the device browser, re-enter their user and password every time. There's clearly been some pushback on this, and that decision has now been paused, and there is no target date for it. Analytics collections are now available on the mobile app. So analytics collections, if you recall from earlier webinars, allow you to combine reports, dashboards, just into a generic collection rather than have them having to exist in a folder, etc. So you can co-locate things that you often use together. You can now see recent changes in forecast categories on the mobile device, and the platform requirements have also changed. You need Android 9 or later and iOS 15 or later. Otherwise, if you're using Mobile Plus, it'll tell you you can't use the application anymore. Sales next. Opportunity product splits are now available. So I've had opportunity splits for quite some time. Now you can split the recognition for specific products. So recognizing each team's members' contribution in different ways, and obviously leading to their commission, which is probably the thing that they actually care about. Pipeline inspection is now available in Enterprise Edition for all users with a Sales Cloud license. No additional license required, no additional cost required. Very nice. This is automatically enabled in new orgs and can be enabled via setup in existing orgs. There are expanded filters that allow you to view other user and teams pipelines, but you do need view all permission on opportunities here. So you wouldn't typically be giving that to many of your sales reps. And you can update more fields without leaving the inspection page, including checkboxes, emails, phone numbers, and URLs. Collaborative forecasting now has some built-in charts to make best use of these, ensure historical trending is enabled, and set the retention period to the max. Then toggle to the chart view from the grid view. So the first chart that's offered is the forecast changes chart. That shows how the current forecast has changed week by week, broken down by forecast category. So that allows you to see how your sales reps are changing that, and you can decide whether you agree with that. While the historical trends chart shows you how forecasts for the current period compare with previous periods. I don't think this is the most helpful screen grab, as it kind of suggests that everything was always the same, but hopefully your real data will show some differences. Now on to the final topic of our regular programming, service. A couple of enhancements here. On the knowledge side of things, you can increase the default limits. It's been a few years since knowledge has been around, but finally there's a little bit more control over that. So the total number of articles, the maximum categories per category group, you can change those two things. You do have to contact Salesforce to request this though. There's a new standard next review date field, so you can use that to trigger when articles needed to be reviewed and maintained. Most people have done that through a custom solution previously, but this means that you can now have a standard field that triggers that. And something which I think is really useful is the being able to schedule the publication time for an article. As always with Salesforce, it's an approximate time, it's in 15-minute slots. But if you're launching something new and you've got a whole load of content to get out there, you haven't got to rely on individuals remembering to press the button at the right time for a load of different things. You can just line that all up in advance. And even if they trickle through a little bit, you haven't got to worry about things not actually appearing. Cases. So you can link contacts to cases in email to case by one of the best named templates I've ever seen. Find contact for associated case from email to case flow template. So that you'll never forget that. That will flow glibly off the tongue. You add that to the actions and recommendations component, and that matches to contacts based on the email addresses that match the inbound email sender. So likely to match to one, but you never know. So that brings us to the end of generally available features. So let's have a little look at what's coming out a little bit down the line in the shape of the beta features. Remember, as always, beta features may never go live. Always make your purchasing decisions on generally available features, yada, yada, yada. You're going to be able to configure search objects by profile. So currently you can configure searchable objects across all users, but this will allow you to have specific configurations for specific user profiles. So it may be that you've got certain groups of users that you don't want to be able to search across, I don't know, cases. They should be able to see some case data, but they can't actually search them. They can just be directed to things you direct them to. So in the little screen grabs here, in my pre-release org, I've created an admin's configuration for system administrators because I don't necessarily want them searching business data. So this is the first look at something I think everyone's been asking for this really since the dawn of Salesforce, the ability to configure mass actions on related lists and list views. So in this release, it's limited to creating and updating records, but still, it's a great start. So in the example here, I've selected 2 of the contacts from United Oil and Gas, Lauren Boyle and Abby Green, and I want to update them because they've moved on. So I fire off my update quick action. This allows me to change the account they work at, which is now Burlington Textiles. And then when I save this, it confirms that I'm updating 2 records and I'm changing the account name. As I say, clearly early days, but very much heading in the right direction, and great to see this finally happening. This must be another one of the benefits of the Lightning experience, that it's opened up this kind of capability. Flow reactive components, these allow changes made to the data in one component to influence others on the same screen. This applies to custom Lightning web components and, in quote marks, supported standard components. You have to opt into this and save your flows to API version 57 or later, because this was actually went into beta in spring 23. There's a chatter group where you can view the history and discussions around this feature. And if you'd like to see more information, and again, a worked example, check out my blog at the short link shown. Some other betas that are available, dynamic forms supported on the mobile app, HTTP post callouts from Flow, so probably the outbound messaging feature parity at that point in time. Dynamic formulas in Flow as well, and also being able to configure the maximum depth of chained queuable jobs rather than relying on the default. So as usual, haven't tried to cover everything. There's a release readiness page at the short link shown. You can find the release notes, the link shown. There's a trailhead badge, all the usual things. Which brings us to the end of regular programming, or does it? Actually, I'm going to do a Columbo close and say just one more thing. We're having another webinar next week on Thursday, the 8th of June, bridging the gap between IT and marketing, mostly featuring the head of our MarTech practice, Sanyal Ali, but also with a cameo from me talking about the interfacing with IT. So if you're interested in this, please sign up in the using the short link shown. Sorry, we haven't got the short link there, we've got a link there. I'll be sharing this deck afterwards, but scan the QR code if you're interested in signing up for that. Give that a moment for everybody to scan that short link. As I say, I'll be sharing the deck anyway, so you'll be able to scan it afterwards. So that brings us to the end of our programming, and let me just check and see if we've got any questions. And we don't, which is great because my voice is starting to go anyway. Or everyone's just had enough after 59 slides of Salesforce content. So as always, thanks very much for joining us. Thanks for your attention. Appreciate you giving up 40 minutes of your day to learn about this. If you are curious or want to know more about any of these features, if you're a BrightGen customer, please reach out to your friendly service manager. Otherwise, feel free to contact one of our account executives, sales@brightgen.com, and they'll be delighted to talk to you more about it. So once again, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of the day, and I hope to see you at our next webinar. Goodbye.